Okay, so let's try to ground the conversation in some specifics. So some people watching this or listening to this might not know what we're talking about. There's just all of this analysis, a bit of an autopsy on the Democratic Party after 2024. And this new book is coming out, Abundance, by Derek Thompson and Ezra Klein. And they're trying to reclaim what the party should be about. And it's this idea of YIMBYism. It almost feels like a rebranded YIMBYism. I don't want to be uncharitable, but that's what it feels like, which stands for yes in my backyard.
A lot of it's about zoning restrictions and stuff like that, right? But a lot of it is also about governance, like liberal governance. But go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, it's probably smart to rebrand the phrase yes in my backyard. I don't know if the people who say that even know that it's funny, but anyway, and the Democrats are a bit of a broken locker room right now. And I look at it with some measure of maybe it's sympathy. I'm not even sure what to call it, because I'm going to give my theory, which I've written about already. I just feel like the situation is more difficult for them than is being acknowledged. And like the NBA viewership question where everybody's right about everything, it's got that element to it where everybody's theory about what's wrong, it's all true. But the main thing I do think is that they lost Twitter to Musk. And without that platform where people can coalesce and come up with a message to hammer, it's all just a bunch of noise. It's all just fractured. And they don't have an ability to really message a lot of this. And so I think that it's almost the main problem, and I don't know how to fix that problem for them. I think they're in a worse situation than even a lot of the popularists would say. And people like Matt Yglesias would say, it's thermostatic and the pendulum will swing back. Well, maybe, but I don't know. You kind of have to play to win games, to use a Pat sports analogy.
Right. That's been my general critique of it, which is that there needs to be some energy about it, and there needs to be some philosophy that you have, right? I mean, this is where the soccer thing really works, I think, where, there are teams that can just sit back and they can kind of say, we are going to just defend with 5 in the back and we're going to try and win 1-0, right? But that those teams, you can't play like that at home. And if you're a big club like Manchester United, for example, you can't play that way because like you're a big club and you're supposed to be entertaining and you're supposed to be cool. And you're never going to win, for example, 3 trophies playing such a cynical style unless this is like an Italian club in like the 1970s or something like that, 1980s. Like that era is over. And so what you need to do is you need to figure out some system that works, right? And it needs to be a somewhat offensive system. That's what Pep Guardiola did, right? For Manchester City, Bayern Munich, and Barcelona. And I feel like with the Democrats, it's like basically if you listen to some of the centrists and the people who are big on this type of thing, like there's no offensive strategy that is going on. There's no definition of who we are and like what we're doing. I listened to Gavin Newsom's podcast because I'm writing about it this week. Gavin Newsom, the last episode of Tim Walz is a little bit different, but the first 4 episodes were with like Charlie Kirk, Steve Bannon, and Michael Savage. And it's just like basically Gavin Newsom disavowing every single thing that liberals actually believe, right? And it's like, why would I vote for you? Like you think the same things as Charlie Kirk? Like I'll just vote for Charlie. If I think those things, I'll just vote for Charlie Kirk because at least I believe that Charlie Kirk actually believes them.
I have friends who are more on the right, and I watch people who are on the right, and they keep having this drumbeat they're playing of watch out for Gavin Newsom.
Oh my God.
I fear him.
Well, we know.
He could be president. I think to myself, maybe he just appeals to you more than the Democratic primary voter. He actually needs to vote for him. And look, Newsom's a good test. Maybe 6'3", good looking, triumphs over all of these other petty concerns.
No, I think he has no shot. But I think the reason that is just because he's a San Francisco liberal. Like, we're going to do that again? We're going to pick another.
He's willing to say anything. I just think there's something funny. He appeals to elements of the right, and they kind of hate him as a frenemy in many instances.
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
that's
yeah.
conflated with this guy's dangerous. You got to watch out for him. And and maybe, who knows, because a lot of the Democratic game in primaries has been everybody agrees that I'm the person and there's not even a real primary. So if that happens, maybe he's the guy. I'm not sure. But yeah, I think to get nerdy on the politics front, the Democrats are in a bad way. I mean, I just looked at Michael Pruser of Decision Desk. They're down 620,000 registered voters since the election.
No, I know. It's bad. They're in a lot of trouble. And I would agree with your assessment that it's much worse than people think. I think that there will be some swing back because I think Trump is ultimately going to be somewhat unpopular. But that doesn't mean that if you have a swing back that you need to produce, that the thing that it swings back to can't be improved, right? Like, and that seems to be the argument. It's just like, we need to be so cautious and we have to be so conservative. And we need to basically make our entire platform about somebody standing up and saying, well, I don't think that trans women should be able to compete in sports. And that's my entire platform. You're like, that's not a platform.
You need a vision. Like, I think that they need to, like, as a matter of politics beyond the morality or anything else, I do think they need to bend the knee on 2080 issues, but it's not going to do the work of vision and a message and what is this all about. And that's where I do come back to the whole Twitter thing as silly. I got a lot of pushback from my own subscribers on that because they think the Democrats got too into Twitter and that was their problem.
No, they're wrong.
It's probably both. Wrong. I think it's both. I mean, yes, but it's also
it pushed them to the left in some way, in a lot of ways, and that you had kind of embarrassing campaigns in 2020, like Liz Warren was good for a while, and then when Liz Warren was bad, it seemed like what was happening was that her aides were addicted to Twitter and were basically putting out Tumblr posts in her speeches. So that is true. But at this point in where we're at now, which, I read the piece that you wrote, Ethan, I think I agree with it in some ways, which is that basically the idea that somebody is too online is like not true anymore, right? All politics happen online. Now, Twitter specifically, I don't know. I don't know if Twitter is that important. The thing that I think was important was that the Democrats didn't, and I'm not the only person to say this, but I think it was because the Democrats didn't compete at all on the other platforms, right? They didn't talk to Theo Von outside of Bernie, right? They didn't, Bernie went and talked to Theo Von. They didn't talk to Joe Rogan very famously. And the one thing they did was they went on Alex Cooper's show, like Call Her Daddy, and they said, oh, well, this works because they have big listenerships. And like, it was the way they did it was just so like weird. And like, oh, I am doing a podcast. Look at me. I'm like Media 3.0 or something like that. And if you can't just sit there and talk to these people like normal people, then you're going to lose. And the Democrats had almost no presence on there because all the people who are popular on there are like right wingers, right? Like all these guys are right wingers. The only liberal who's popular on any of these platforms at all is Destiny. And that guy sucks.
Well, literally or figuratively, but there's also God, what's his face? The other guy that everybody's writing a profile about.
Oh, Hassan
right
Piker.
Yeah,
I think Hassan has more potential, much more potential than Destiny. But the thing with Hassan, and I think that he is going to be the person that is basically going to, if there's like a liberal Joe Rogan or whatever, it's already Hassan. But Hassan is also like, he's like a leftist, right? And so he's not a mainstream Democrat. And I think actually if you called him that, he would be quite offended, right? So, but I mean, it's like the mainstream Democrats don't have any type of presence on there. And if you ask yourself why, it's because mainstream Democrat politics are lame. Like they don't appeal to anyone. How would you make like an online character who is like basically being like, we must moderate, we must moderate on all issues.
What? It's just like, okay, so what is going on with that? We're getting this ineffable sort of charisma, authenticity problem that they have. I saw a recent episode of Real Time because I was curious about Josh Shapiro. I had never seen Josh Shapiro in an extended conversation. I remembered there was this hubbub about he was going to be the vice presidential candidate. Now there's rumor he might be the presidential candidate in 2028. And I just watched him talk with Bill Maher, and I just went, he doesn't have it. He doesn't have it. He just doesn't have it. Everything is this return to some sort of stump speech. This isn't like how a normal human being would have a conversation.
Did you think
Everything
he was doing Obama as somebody who was coming in cold on him? Did you feel like he was doing an Obama impersonation? Because that's basically that's the party line on it. Yeah, people have said that.
I felt, frankly, it's almost a slight to Obama to say that, because even if Obama has his authenticity problems, which I think are reflected in how he's not been able to get a podcast popular post-presidency, Shapiro just returns everything to this sort of stump speech, and you try to ask him a direct question. I think Maher asked him if his Jewishness played a role in why he didn't get the nomination, and he just basically sidesteps the question and goes, and I'm really proud of my Jewish faith, and I am so da-da-da-da-da-da. It's just, this doesn't work. And there's this almost irony where J.D. Vance, what everyone thinks of him, he was the messaging against him from Tim Walz and the Democrats was he's weird. But then he would sit down with the aforementioned Theo Von, and he could just talk like a person for 2 hours.
And he did really well in the debate too. I mean, in that way, yeah. Walz is the one guy who I think has some appeal in those types of spaces, don't you think?
He's going for it.
He's like his anger, his we fucked up tour, I guess is the best way to put it, has been pretty captivating to watch. I mean, I don't know what I'm not going to try and speculate on what his ambitions are. I haven't talked to him. I tried to talk to him, but it didn't happen. But because I was curious about it. But maybe I will end up talking to him.
I'm not buying Tim Walz.
It's kind of interesting, at least, right?
Yeah, I'm not buying Tim Walz at all, but there is an aspect of the Napoleon. I saw the crown of France on the ground, and I picked it up with my sword for the Democrats, where nobody's in charge. Nobody's running this thing. You could be the guy. And I think Tim Walz, who is widely known for having helped tank the Harris campaign by not being available for interviews
But that was because they were putting him on the bench, don't you think?
Well, but he also had the problem of making things up about his military past. But this is, I don't want to. The whole,
no, you know what? I don't want to. I actually I had forgotten about that, and I remember I was the one that was kind of banging the drum, not about the military stuff, but I was like, he's clearly not exactly. I'm not going to say he's lying. He is clearly not telling the exact truth about when he went to Tiananmen or Hong Kong during Tiananmen Square and when he was there, and he has told 6 different stories of this, and none of them line up or make any sense at all. And I just because I remember trying to piece the timeline together in my head. I was like, wait, no.
He'd be a great White Lotus character. Tim Walz would be, but
I feel like he could communicate. Like he could sit down with Theo Von and he would do a good job, right? Josh Shapiro would not. There's no way Josh Shapiro would. If that's our barometer. I don't think that should be our barometer for presidential candidates, for what it's worth. But in terms of fitting into new media, I think that Walz could do better than Josh Shapiro.
I don't know if Walz is calling his own plays on what he's calling the mean pick 6 or whatever he was doing working for the Harris campaign. But I bring it up to just bring up this, which is that there's this aspiration towards being the normal moderate who's seen as such, but you only get perceived as normal if you're weird, because if you're weird, it conveys authenticity. And so a weirdo is actually, I think, in a way better served than somebody who's so manicured and stump speechy. And I think that's part of their issue, is that they just have a lack of people who seem normal in such a setting because they're not off script in any kind of way. And I don't know how you solve a problem like that. I don't know why that problem exists in the first place.
Well, you need someone who's so on script at all times that it becomes like a whole, news generating outlet, like Stephen A. Smith or something like that.
Do you think Stephen A. is on script?
Well, that was I wrote a column and it was like Stephen A. president. But
okay, so the Stephen A. for president thing, I had this thing, because his main thing, he doesn't have much of a message. But his message is basically the Democrats need to get out of the back room,
right,
and let the people vote on it. And I realized as I was thinking about it, Stephen A. is maybe being strategic here because that's the only way he could win. The only way he could win is this primary with a bunch of people where they're not deciding who's the guy. That's how Stephen A. could win. And so his primary critique of the party, pardon the pun, is something that could enable him. But I think Stephen A. has no message, right? I mean, what is the Stephen A. message? What is the
he
thing
could come up with that eventually. But, you know, Kamala Harris didn't have any message either, you know, and
would Stephen A. Smith have done better than Kamala Harris? This is the question.
Yeah, I
didn't know
for sure. I think so. Yeah, but they would have had, like, if he had time to prepare or whatever. I guess Kamala didn't, but she's been a lifelong politician. The argument that I made for Stephen A. basically was that I actually think that over the next 3 years, this attacking the Democratic Party is going to be the mainstream of politics within the Democratic Party, and that there's going to be a hostile takeover that happens. And that it's going to be led by some people who are on the inside. I think that Gavin Newsom and Tim Walz are both positioning themselves to be that person on the inside who gets to tear down the party. And the reason why they can do that is because they're not in Congress. They're governors, right? So they don't have to work with any of these people. They can shit on them all they want. And so that requires like a very, very online type of person, I think, who's very charismatic and can basically create news cycles on their own, but who also is really good at attacking people. And I wrote this a little bit tongue in cheek, but mostly I wrote it as a way to talk about this theory that I had about how basically contentious intra-party anger at the Democrats is going to be the main politics for the next few years. But Stephen A. has been doing that really well. I mean, did you see when he went on Pod Save America? Yeah, he was hilarious, you know? And so I think people can gravitate towards that type of message for a while, but you are correct that at some point he's going to have to say, this is what I believe, but he has 3 years to figure that out.
I believe in abundance.
Yeah. Okay. So if Stephen A. became the abundance candidate, that would be awesome. It would be the greatest media story of all time. Like, it would be for people like me who are columnists who are not in the abundance camp, right? Who are not part, like it would be like catnip. I would have something to write about every single week.
Oh yes,
which is honestly a struggle sometimes. But yeah, it would be
the abundance is just one more manifestation of the crown is on the ground. I think where. It could be anybody. It could be anything. This party is just nobody's in charge. Nobody knows what to do. The leadership is all 90 years old.
Right.
The gerontocratic aspect of it is also just so strange. It just seems like that happened little by little and then all at once. And I don't know what's going to work. This might be unsatisfying for a lot of listeners. I don't have a strong message for what the Democratic Party should do. I just think that they're in a bad way and in a worse way than much of the media even understands because they're used to a status quo where the party is more culturally, if not dominant, then just influential and actually connects with young people. I mean, one of the more interesting aspects of the David Shore data is that young people in their 18 to their 20s range are far more conservative than millennials and even the boomers. And
did you see that stuff that showed how much their confidence in the future has eroded from previous generations and previous years, just about their general future and the state of the country and everything like that? It's just like,
wouldn't shock me.
Yeah, they're getting more black pill, they're becoming more nihilistic, and as a result, they're becoming more right wing, which none of that is surprising, right? It shouldn't be surprising to anybody that's happened.
I don't know. I don't know if I would connect having a more pessimistic outlook. Like if we went into this 10 years ago and you said, would that make you more on the right or on the left? I don't know what I would say, but it's a different perspective on life. I have said a few times, it's weird to be in the generational cohort that's way more liberal than the younger people.
Right. That is weird. It is weird. Yeah. It is weird that you see Gen Z and they're probably more conservative than you because you just assume that basically the next generation is always going to be more liberal than the older people. But I don't know. I think the reason why I think it makes sense is just because if you're a young person, you think all these institutions are bad, you have no future, then you're going to pick the I'm not the only person to say this, but you're going to pick the anti-establishment party, which is the Republicans. And Trump basically giving the middle finger to everything, saying, I'm going to tear it all down. And then what do you have on the other side? You have people being like, well, it's important to maintain all these fragile networks of whatever. And for a lot of, they're right about a lot of it, but like they can't even explain to you why it's important. Like I found this so interesting with USAID, for example, right? Which like, I don't think that the Democrats have done a good job of explaining why USAID is important. Right? They're just like, this cannot stand. Yeah. And it's like, well, why is this important? Right? Because there's a way that you can spin this where if you were in Seattle during the WTO protest and you're like a hardcore anarchist leftist, right? That this was kind of the thing that you were hoping would happen, right? That stuff like USAID would go away. Now, there's a lot of humanitarian aspects to it as well, obviously. No. But the humanitarian aspects are not explained why that's important by the Democratic Party, right? Like they're just kind of sitting back and not actually defending any of this stuff. And so there's no defense of the institutions when the institutions are under attack, because the people who are the defenders of the institutions are actually terrified of being seen as the defenders of the institutions. So in fact, they say nothing, right? And then the other side just gets to run haywire and be like, we're fucking everything up. And then the young people are like, yeah, fuck everything up. My life sucks. And like, I don't know. I totally understand that. Like, I find it almost impossible to believe why a young person. I think if I was 19, 20 years old right now, that I might be a right winger too, because I was young and rebellious. I wanted to tear down the system. What am I going to do? I'm going to vote for like the party of like Tony Fauci, like who made me miss my high school graduation, right? That made me sit in my parents' house for 2 years. I'd be furious about that. So I don't know. I think that all that stuff sort of coheres together into a very right-wing young group of people, which I don't know. I'm scared of, but I also understand. I don't mean to cut you off. Go ahead. Yep.
No. I was accidentally cutting you off because it's similar to the problem writ large, the Democrats, where everybody is correct. Like everybody's correct about why young men have gone right. Everybody's theory is probably somewhat explanatory, but it's strange. I mean, we'll end on this. We're getting into all sorts of topics I don't normally cover, and I feel insecure about that. I hope the audience is okay about it. But it's strange. It's in many ways good that people live longer, and but it creates these strange situations in politics now where I have gray hair, as you can see on my head, and I feel generationally alienated from the perspective of people older than myself on something like Russia. Right. I feel I am not a young person. But I know that people my age and younger than me all look at a lot of the fixation right now of the Democratic Party on combating Russia and just don't even connect to it on this visceral level. And that's not to say that I love Vladimir Putin or that I'm in favor of his invasion of Ukraine, but it's this strange disconnect and the strange sort of thing where the party is struggling with young people, the Democratic Party is, and then it's just all about how we need to fight against Russia and battle for Ukraine without any sort of explanation to the young people, which you're saying about, well, how does this make your life better? Why is this important to you? But it sort of resonates with people of a certain age. They could be right geopolitically. I don't know, but it's just, it's never been explained to anybody younger than people of a certain cohort who associate Russia with the Cold War and everything else. It's never explained as to why does this make your life better? Why is this essential to you? That's not explained.
That's a gerontocracy problem, because the person who was supposed to explain all that to us was Joe Biden, right? And that what Joe Biden comes from, and what a lot of the boomers come from, the MSNBC boomers come from, is a world in which the assumption was that American intervention in the world was good, that America should be the shining beacon on the hill, and that we should lead the world, not just in promoting democracy, but from a moral sense as well, right? And so that the invasions of sovereign countries by dictators is intolerable. I mean, that was basically how we defended the first Gulf War, which is just like Kuwait, even though it's a kingdom and not a democracy, should not be invaded by this dictator, right? And I think older people just have that much more drilled into their heads. They just assume that it's true, and that people of our generation, I think, I'm a little bit older than you, but not that much older than you.
I think you're technically Gen X, but spiritually millennial is what I would say about you.
I was born on the last day of I was born on literally the last day of Gen X, but they were just much more skeptical about this stuff, you know? And I don't think we were drilled in the same way with all this patriotic stuff about, and so it doesn't make as much clear sense to us, because we don't assume the thing that this is how the United States always has to act, right? And that's why it's a problem. I don't know. I don't understand the gerontocracy thing among the Democrats at all, but it seems like they're so addicted to it that they can't get away with it. Like Chuck Schumer is 74 years old. I mean, we're about to elect here in our area, right? Like I think this person, I like this person as a politician, but I don't think that Barbara Lee should be the mayor of Oakland at the age of 77 or 78, right? Or is she 78? Yeah. She's 78.
She's not young. I know that much. And
so
Pelosi is still, there's like, Pelosi's running the party. Pelosi out. There's something.
Yeah.
There's an irony.
Old Bay Area people are like, we'll die, I guess. Like, you die of Feinstein. It's like,
can you imagine if you were Joe Biden, had your faculties at all, and Pelosi's telling you need to step aside because you're too old? It would just be, I mean, come on. There's a picture of you with John Kennedy. You got to leave me alone.
I know. Yeah, Bernie Sanders is doing, I mean, I love Bernie, but, you know, Bernie's doing his, it seems like Bernie is really running for president again right now, doing his tours, you know, and I'm just like, oh my God, can you guys stop being so old?